everyone. Inshallah, we'll be talking about the qualities of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. So, why qualities of Ibrahim alayhi salam? When we read the Quran and look at the passages that talks about Ibrahim alayhi salam, one thing that really attracts attention is the multitude and the number of qualities, virtues, attributes, adjectives used for Ibrahim alayhi salam, which places him in a very significant position, and it really encouraged me to look into that further. And I can say that in the Quran, we do have more than 25 or so qualities that are mentioned, extraordinary qualities, I would perhaps say. And if we are to include prophetic tradition, that will go even beyond. But for the sake of brevity and just not to bore you, I will talk about 10 of them in this presentation. But let's begin with the importance of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam first. I think that's really an important point to begin with. So Ibrahim alayhi salam is mentioned 69 times in the Quran. This really makes him the second most often repeated prophet in the Quran after Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So that in itself, in our tradition, places Ibrahim alayhi salam in a unique position. The number of, the frequency of his mention, and the fact that there is a chapter named after Ibrahim alayhi salam, Surah Ibrahim, which is chapter 14 of the Quran, that shows us this person has an important place in our tradition, and it comes out quite clearly in the Quran. When we look at the personality of Ibrahim alayhi salam, he is really a multifaceted personality. First and foremost, we know, and as we just entered the month of Zil-Hijjah and the season of Hajj, we really associate him rightly to the establishment of Kaaba and to the pillar, the main pillar that is, one of the fundamental pillars in the institution of Hajj. But on top of that, he is with his struggle, with his community, and the way he is, systematically dealing with polytheism, fighting against polytheism, and declaring Tawheed. It is kind of personified in Ibrahim alayhi salam. We will come to that point when we talk about his qualities. When we talk about pure monotheism, Tawheed, and pure submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we really associate, our minds directly goes as a great example to Ibrahim alayhi salam. The way he struggles, the way he actually deals with polytheism or wrong beliefs, idolatry, whatsoever, we can see that there is a great methodology. It is quite advanced, and he is using logic in that respect quite frequently, and he knows the context very well, and he deals with the people, and he relates to them and uses a language that can kind of make sense to them. Some people, they misinterpret that, and they even take the way that he might have thought about worshipping sun or moon, but it is all about having that methodology and systematic approach to deal with the problem in hand and logically defeat the arguments that they are having. Another important thing, perhaps, when we think about Ibrahim alayhi salam is, when he established Kaaba and he institutionalized the pilgrimage Hajj, he also made the land, Kaaba and the around, a holy land which prohibited to even, destroy plants, to actually hunt there, cut down the trees and whatsoever. In that sense, some of the scholars, they argue that he is the first person to make some serious decisions about environmental issues. He was the founder of many initiatives, so we don't have really time to talk about that. And this really places him in a very unique position. Another interesting thing in the Quran is about the necessity to emulate the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. In the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly tells us that Prophet Ibrahim is one of the greatest example. And this is almost verbatim to how Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is introduced. قَدْ كَانَتْ لَكُمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ فِي Ibrahim, Quran says. So there is an excellent example to follow in Ibrahim and those in his company. You would know that the verse says, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِي رَسُولِ اللَّهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ لِمَنْ كَانَ يَرْجُو اللَّهَ وَالْيَوْمَ الْآخِرِ. So Prophet ﷺ was also introduced pretty much with the same wording. Those who are willing to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who are having some sort of belief in the hereafter, they will find a great example in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So it is also, there is a command in the Quran in chapter 16, Surah Nahl, addressing to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ittabi' millata Ibrahim hanifa. So it is a command to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet Muhammad, to follow the path of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Some other verses, they actually talk about the detail of this command and how it is actually fulfilled. So I think these things are really giving us a great impression that we need to look into this personality. We need to understand the qualities, the attributes of this particular prophet and the path that he is on. So that gives us this, encouragement and kind of curiosity to further look into the qualities of Ibrahim alayhi salam. As I mentioned, there are a lot in the Quran. We will just talk about 10 of them. The first one is Hanif. Quran says, مَا كَانَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ يَهُودِيًّا وَلَا نَصْرَانِيًّا وَلَكِنْ كَانَ حَنِيفًا مُسْلِمًا وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. So Ibrahim was not a Jew nor a Christian, because as Razi, Fakhruddin Razi, great 13th century Mufassir, commentator of the Quran, would argue, every single tradition will somehow relate them to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And he gives even example of polytheists in Mecca that, they didn't believe, they actually associate partners with God. They are far distant from the path of Ibrahim alayhi salam, yet they want to be related to him. Christians and Jews also, and in current modern period, we kind of refer to these three traditions as, Abrahamic religions. So it is pretty much, Quran is making it clear, the path and the faith of Ibrahim alayhi salam. He says, not a Jew nor a Christian, but he was Hanif. This term, Hanif, used 12 times in the Quran, and most of the time it is associated to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So when we look into the definition of this term, Hanaf in Arabic, it comes from Hanaf. The root for Hanif is Hanaf. It means to go from deviance to soundness, from crookedness. Hanaf means, if something is crooked, to actually straighten that. So it is a straightforwardness, from misguidance to truth. So when we talk about Ibrahim alayhi salam, so he is not actually on the deviant path. Rather, he is on the pure faith, on the pure path, faith or tawheed, or monotheism. So that is how Quran actually introduces this term. And when this term is Hanif is mentioned, it is talking about that pure monotheism, that it has not polluted with associating partners with God. Because of that, most of the verses that talk about this quality of Ibrahim alayhi salam, or the path of Ibrahim alayhi salam, in 6 occasions in the Quran, it ends with وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ. He was never of those who associate partners with Allah. So that is like a pure monotheism and pure tawheed. But in hadith collections, this Hanif is also associated with kind of, on top of being away from crookedness, being away from, deviance, it is also associated with lenience, tolerance, acceptance. And Prophet ﷺ in a hadith says that I was sent with the lenient, the tolerant and easy religion of Hanifiyah. Hanifiyah as-Samha is used in that respect. So the way of Ibrahim alayhi salam, or the path of Ibrahim alayhi salam, or him being a Hanif, it has two important connotations. One is, he is absolutely monotheist, having that pure faith and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he is actually a lenient, tolerant, acceptance, personality. We will, the rest of the presentation will perhaps give that understanding, and will give more insight into that aspect as well. So, but the most rich verse in the Quran, perhaps, that talks about this Hanif, Ibrahim alayhi salam having the Hanif, or explaining that term, is this verse in the Quran, chapter 30, verse 30. فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. So this verse says, set your whole being upon the religion of Islam as one of pure faith. As Hanif, set your religion, set your face towards this religion, which is Hanif. So that, what is this? It is free from unbelief, it is free from polytheism, hypocrisy. That purity is one thing. But Quran also says, فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا. That is the fitra that Allah has created, originated human beings from. So in this verse, it is quite clear that Hanif and fitra, that human beings, they born with, has that inclination towards good, towards accepting the oneness of God. So it is a primordial path and pattern that Allah has revealed to humanity, which befits the best human disposition, which is a pure monotheism. That's why it says, ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ. This is the upright religion, which has no crookedness, deviance in it. And Ibrahim alayhi salam is a symbol for this. His struggle and his manifestation of Tawheed and his fight against polytheism, and the path he actually represents is that pure path, pure faith and, pure monotheism that has no association of partners with God. So in the level of his faith, this path is the path that human beings, they're born with. If it is not actually influenced by external things, it is the path that every human being will kind of incline towards. That's why it is a primordial path. And that is it's about his iman, it's about his faith. Another important quality is his Taslimiyyah. So we are going through the days of sacrifice as well. You will all remember this story of sacrifice. Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, let alone a clear-cut command, although the dreams, the vision of prophets are considered as revelation. So he interpreted dream as such, and he just acted upon. And not only him, his son also, he just submitted to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, Ya abati f'al ma tu'mar, satajiduni insha'Allah min as-sabirin. He said, when he explained his dream to his son, his son said, "Oh, Father, do what you have been commanded. You will find me patient." So his wife, when he was leaving them behind and leaving them in the desert, which has no plantation, بِوَادٍ غَيْرِ ذِي زَرْعٍ إِنْ the بَيْتِكَ الْمُحَرَّمْ, Quran says, there is no plantation, no habitation, nothing. It's the desert, middle of nowhere. And his wife, when Hajar asked, "Is this the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?" He said, "Yes." And then she said, we just submitted to the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So similarly, when we look at the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, Quran praises Ibrahim alayhi salam in Surah Hajj and says, إِذْ قَالَ لَهُ رَبُّهُ أَسْلِمْ قَالَ أَسْلَمْتُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. When his Lord told him to submit yourself wholly to the command of your Lord, without a second thought, he just said, "I have submitted myself wholly to the Lord of the worlds." So that is the path Ibrahim alayhi salam was upon. Islam, in a very, technical sense, means those who submitted to the religion or to the path of Prophet Muhammad, but all prophets are coming with the same message. That's why, referring to Ibrahim alayhi salam in the same chapter in Surah Hajj, Quran says, مِلَّةَ أَبِيكُمْ Ibrahim. This is the path, this is the way of your forefather. They were named هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Allah named them as Muslims, those who submitted themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Min qablu, that was previous, like in the Ibrahim alayhi salam, and those who are, submitting to Allah, through the message of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But this submission, and when we kind of read the story of Ibrahim alayhi salam, it gives us a great understanding what it really means. If you have faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you are a pure monotheist and believe in him, the automatic conclusion, requirement is to actually submit to his orders. And this submission is to commands that we are pleased with, as well as to those which we are not pleased with. We may not understand, the ultimate wisdom and reason behind that. But since we believe in oneness of God, we appreciate and understand his full authority, no matter we are pleased or not, we just submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a submission that relates to this world as well as to the hereafter. It is a submission that fits the style of our era as well as those which do not fit. So sometimes there is a command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should kind of approach like the verse says, Aslim, submit. And, without a second thought, it might be against the norms of the society. It might be, we cannot perhaps reconcile at that moment because of the external influence. But the submission of Ibrahim alayhi salam is teaching that, it can be, aligned with the norms, maybe sometimes not. It is a submission that are appreciated by others, as well as those which are not appreciated, even maybe condemned. It's a submission that gives us personal, familial, or national benefits, as well as to those which don't. So ultimately, when we look at the submission of Ibrahim alayhi salam, when we look at his Taslimiyyah, when we look at his Islam, how he submitted himself to Allah, it is an unconditional submission to every command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why he called Hanif. He is pure monotheist, and he is Muslim and in the absolute sense. So after having faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after having that appreciation of oneness of God, and submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his orders, another important quality, and this is often mentioned in many other prophetic stories and verses that talks about other prophets, is truthfulness. So this is chapter 19 Surah Maryam, Quran says, وَاذْكُرْ فِي الْكِتَابِ Ibrahim. Make mention of Ibrahim in the book. إِنَّهُ كَانَ صِدِّيقًا. He was truthful. He was Siddiq. This is an exaggerated form, mubalagha in Arabic. So he is a truthful, is a sincere man of truthfulness. That is how Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam is introduced. As I said, many other prophets are introduced. It's a cornerstone of being a true believer, particularly in our time as well, where people, they easily tend to, speculate, lie, and the lying has even different colors, that gives the message that you can lie in certain occasions. But one of the fundamental attributes of all prophets is truthfulness, because this moral conduct, or this quality, this attribute, is extremely important to give people a full confidence in you, full faith in you. If people are not lying on mundane matters, how they are going to lie about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and revelation. So this is an extraordinary credit that we should not really waste and misuse. So as believers, as Muslims, we have a good reputation in the community as well. Just a final note about this is, yes, we are talking about Ibrahim alayhi salam and how it is introduced, but Siddiqiyyah, this truthfulness, is the second most important station in spirituality. Quran uses minan nabiyyin, prophets on the top, was Siddiqin, and second to the prophets is the level one can attain in spirituality, which is a truthfulness. So another quality of Ibrahim alayhi salam is his gratefulness for Allah's blessings. Quran praises Ibrahim alayhi salam in chapter 16, Surah Nahl, verse number 121. Shakiran li an'umih, says. He was always thankful for his favors, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favors, which ijtabahu wa hadahu ila siratin mustaqim. So Allah has chosen him. He has guided him to a straight path to follow himself and to guide others. So his gratefulness, one might relate to this, him being chosen as a prophet, him being guided to the straight path. But it is not only about that. His gratefulness is for everything Allah has actually blessed Ibrahim alayhi salam. So we as followers of Ibrahim alayhi salam and this tradition, so we are learning to be grateful for Allah's favors upon us. So existence is a favor. We couldn't be in non-existence, for instance. Allah created us. So being existed is a blessing in itself. So then think about, being a human. We could have been another creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Allah has created us as human beings. We have a faith as a gift, belief as a gift. This is something that needs, gratitude as well. We are believers of Allah, and we acknowledge His oneness, Tawheed, like Ibrahim alayhi salam. Another great blessing that we have. We do belong to a community of prophets and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Another extraordinary blessing. So we have health, we have so many other things to be grateful for. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, Allah praises him that he was always thankful for this kind of blessings, and he was always kind of showing effort to acknowledge this and to appreciate these blessings that he was receiving. Another quality of Ibrahim alayhi salam is his hospitality. Quran gives an interesting insight into this. In tradition, he is known as al-Adyaf, the father of guests, because he was hosting. So many of the sources, historic sources, they say he was never eating alone. He was always, inviting some people to share food with them. So that's why he was called as the father of guests, because of the multitude, and generosity he was showing. But in the Quran, an interesting kind of reference and evidence to this is when angels, they came to bring the glad tidings of a child, Ishaq alayhi salam, and also they are passing through Ibrahim alayhi salam to visit the city of Lut alayhi salam because of their wrong conducts and whatsoever, they are going to be punished. But when these angels, they are coming and passing through, the first thing, Quran says, he was, let alone knowing them, he was afraid of them. In his self, he felt a fear towards them. But regardless, for these visitors that he doesn't know, he did not invite them, and and they are not showing any sign of hunger as well. Quran says, "Faragha ila ahlihi," excuse me, "فجاء بعجل سمين فقربه إليهم قال ألا تأكلون." So he withdrew to his household and brought a roast of fatted calf. He placed it before them and said, "Will you not eat?" So he is slaughtering a fatted calf, preparing a beautiful dinner for guests he doesn't even know. So imagine, for people who would know and how he is going to, host them. This is a Quranic reference and evidence for Ibrahim alayhi salam's high degree of generosity and hospitality. That's why he is famously known as the father of guests. And if you are, spreading a good table for visitors, in our tradition, they will say this is a table of Ibrahim, referring to Ibrahim alayhi salam. So that's such an extraordinary quality to show that hospitality for people, no matter he knows or he doesn't know. Another interesting one, these are three qualities in one verse about Ibrahim alayhi salam. That is also unique, although some of the Awwah is a unique, for instance, and Halim is the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is attributed to Ibrahim alayhi salam, but all three of them in one verse in chapter Hud is actually attributed to Ibrahim alayhi salam, which says, "Inna Ibrahim," certainly, indeed, Ibrahim was Halimun, Awwahun, Munib. So Ibrahim alayhi salam was Halim, he was Awwah, and he was Munib. So what is Halim? Hilm, it means, he has an even temper, who is calm, who is able to endure difficulties. So he is forbearing. That is an extraordinary quality. The Hilm, and as I said, it is one of the names, attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as well. So it's not only about, having that, clemency. It's also like when some people, they wrong a person who is Halim, let alone getting angry, he will give something, and he will, respond with goodness, not goodness with goodness, but evil with goodness. And wronging these people will increase their hilm, their, clemency. It's an extraordinary kind of quality, mannerism that is attributed to Ibrahim alayhi salam. His son also in the Quran, Prophet Ismail, فَبَشَّرْنَاهُ بِغُلَامٍ Halim is mentioned. So he was, given with that Halim, Clement's son as well. Awwah is a quality which is translated as tender-hearted here. The person who is merciful, who has a very soft heart, and the person who is actually conscious of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala must always, that is, that state of consciousness, and that's who is having deep knowledge and faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that does acting as if he is in the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Munib means, who is often turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it doesn't mean they committed something wrong that they are turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not at all. Rather, this, inaba here is kind of a, no matter what kind of circumstances is there, you need to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Open your heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Ibrahim alayhi salam was praised with all these qualities at once in this particular verse. And it shows that, because like if you think about the difficulties he is going through and the approach he is taking towards his father, for instance, he uses a very soft language. His father is saying that, go away, I'm going to stone you. And he just says, Qala salam, peace be upon you. That is his response. And he says, I'm going to make a supplication for you. So his people are throwing him into the fire. We will see in a moment that he's making a supplication for them. So this, this forbearance, this, and how he was able to rise above all these difficulties, because his heart was connected with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala all the time. He was Awwah, he was Munib. So he was able to go through this, extreme level of trials that, when people, they throw him into the fire, he said, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is sufficient for me. He is the best, person who can kind of protect me. And when people, they, try to execute him, force him to an exile, he's turning to Allah. He said, Inni muhajirun ila Rabbi sayahdin. I am migrating to my Lord. You are forcing me to leave my land, but this is a migration to my Lord. It is a firar ilallah. I'm taking refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's why these qualities are really extraordinary qualities. And these qualities are the kind of carriers, means that he was able to rise above all these difficulties in those difficult circumstances. That's why one of the meaning of Hanif, as I said, is having that forbearance and having that, acceptance and tolerance. So it is an extraordinary quality. And these things will result him to raise and reach a level of khillah or Khalilullah, a friendship of Allah. That will be another attribute or quality that we will talk about in a moment. Another quality is his sound heart. Is جاء ربه بقلب سليم, Quran says. He actually came, he turned to his Lord with a heart that is sound and pure from any trace of insincerity in terms of faith. So this pure heart, Qalb Salim, is actually one of the objectives of spirituality, purifying heart. And this is one of the key terms or expressions in the Quran as well, that, is the center of Islamic spirituality. So this heart is a completely pure, which has no fault in it. It is, fault in the sense of sin, in the sense of doubt, in the sense of shirk, associating partners with God. It is full of love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It is a heart that is full of love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it is a heart that is completely submitted to Allah and His orders. So it is a heart clean from evil, towards anybody, and towards, it is close to this kind of negative feelings that can be recipient to the blessings and, fuyuzat is mentioned in Islamic spirituality, the blessings, the wisdoms, and the knowledge that descends. So it is a heart that receives that because of the soundness, because it was purified from these evil thoughts, because it is purified from these deviations. So it is a heart that is a center or house for those good qualities, and to appreciate the oneness of God and understand the secrets of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Another quality is of Ibrahim alayhi salam is his compassion. According to Aramaic language, scholars says Ibrahim in original Aramaic is coming from Ab Rahim. In Arabic as well, Ab means father, Rahim means mercy. So he is the father he is a merciful father. He is a compassionate, tender-hearted father, Ibrahim alayhi salam. So I mentioned a few things about his relation, like his struggle with his father, for instance, and then with his community, and then with the Pharaoh, with the Nimrud, with the king of that time. So, and then, people forcing him to leave that city. What he does and what is his response? This is a supplication upon receiving all these kind of threats, towards his life, and all those, harassments and persecutions. This is his supplication in the Quran. Rabbi, innahunna adlalna kathiran minan nas. They have indeed caused many among humankind to go astray. فَمَنْ تَبِعَنِي فَإِنَّهُ مِنِّي. Who follows me is truly of me. وَمَنْ عَصَانِي, and who disobeys me, فَإِنَّكَ غَفُورٌ رَحِيمٌ. So he says, surely you are all forgiving, all compassionate. So when it comes to those who wronged him, who doesn't follow his call, does not pay attention to his call, rather, persecute him, aims at his life, he says, Rabbi, innaka ghafurur rahim. You are ghafur, the forgiving, and the all compassionate. That is his response. And he makes another supplication that becomes a legacy. We Muslims, we use this supplication every day in our prayers. رَبَّنَا اغْفِرْ لِي وَلِوَالِدَيَّ وَلِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ يَوْمَ يَقُومُ الْحِسَابِ. Forgive me, my parents, all the believers, on the day on which the reckoning will be established. So it becomes a legacy. So this heart, this mercy, this compassion of Ibrahim alayhi salam is quite apparent there as well. I think one of the most interesting verses about Ibrahim alayhi salam is this one, which talks about Ibrahim alayhi salam himself, a community by himself. That's a very interesting expression. Inna Ibrahim kana ummatan qanitan lillahi hanifan wa lam yakun minal mushrikin. Ibrahim was an exemplary leader, or in another way, he was community ummah in himself, who dedicated to do good for the community, which made him an exemplary leader, as if a community by himself, sincerely obedient to Allah as a man of pure faith, free from any stain of unbelief and hypocrisy, and he was not of those who associate partners with God. So when people, they talk about him being ummah, community in himself, they say because he was a leader of that community, and the community that generated, many prophets, because from his offspring, many prophets are coming, and traditions, faith traditions are coming from his offspring, they say him being a leader makes him in a position that, he is actually like a community in himself. Another kind of understanding is because of his, concern for believers, his care for the community, and his supplications for the generations to come, it places him, in a position, in a place that he is a community, a nation in himself. If you, as follower of Ibrahim alayhi salam, understanding his path and having a care and concern for a community, you will be elevated to that level as well. You can be, if your care is the entire community, and if you care for them, have some sort of a concern about people, and leaders should have that approach. So you will be considered like an ummah in itself. So last quality is Ibrahim alayhi salam. I think when this name is mentioned, many will remember this. Ibrahim Khalilullah. He is the friend of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, وَاتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ إِبْرَاهِيمَ خَلِيلًا, Quran says. Allah accepted Ibrahim alayhi salam as a friend who is close to him, who is trusted or loved. You can say beloved of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Khulla in Arabic, imagine there are two things right next to one another and there is a gap in between. So khulla is this gap, it shows that closeness. Or khulla means the loved one. So that is lexical meaning of the term. So Ibrahim alayhi salam, because of his approach, because of his full submission, that tender-heartedness with his, sound heart and his compassion towards a community, and his, according to Tabari, his patience towards those extraordinary trials and tribulations, and his upon all of them, his full faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala elevated him to that proximity, if you like, and he became a friend of Allah, which everybody wants to be loved, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and his actions to be pleased. And we are seeing him being mentioned with these multiple qualities. That shows how much he is loved and the place he is holding in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we will be, I'll finish with this tradition that is attributed to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, leaving aside the criticism of it from a technical term. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, I am the one for whose coming Ibrahim prayed for. So he made a supplication that, from his offspring, someone who will come purify people, they take people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatsoever, in Surah Baqarah. So that supplication is accepted. I am the one of whom Jesus gave glad tidings of, and I resemble my forefather Ibrahim more than anyone else. My understanding of this resemblance could be both, literally physical resemblance, but resemblance in terms of the qualities, in terms of the, mannerism, in terms of the attributes, in terms of the morality, in terms of those, praised virtues that are found in the Quran, which Quran commanded believers to follow the path. So these things are similarities between the Prophet and Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He refers to Ibrahim alayhi salam. May Allah allow us to understand and appreciate these extraordinary qualities and implement in our day-to-day life, inshallah. So thank you for your patience. I'll stop here.